is it not true that readings of the sacred scripture have echoes, each with resonance for the listener and the reader? If one is in the habit of listening carefully, of reading carefully, of doing some shape or form Lectio Divina, then it will happen that over the years one will relive the grace attached to a verse. In the monastic life, that is particularly true insofar as some psalms, for instance, or some readings put to music, antiphons, great responses, will echo in the deepest level of the memory banks. And here today we, as it happens, have just had one in question. When I was in France in the 70s and 80s, we still had the obligation of the Office of the Dead in choir in the first years when I was there, and then eventually, against the wish actually of quite a few of us, it was decided by the General Chapter to have it, except on certain occasions, in the solitude of the cell. But the psalm attached to the Office of Readings for Lords, that's morning prayer, or the Office of the Dead, is this one from the dying, condemned as it were to death, King Hezekiah, and the one who's given mercy and relives, because it talks about going to the pit of death and that whole gloomy world which one is every week therefore thinking about and spending a long time with, because the Office of the Dead was quite long. By the way, did you know that the word dirge comes from that? People don't know what they're saying when they talk about a dirge. Well, actually it's the word dilige, which is the first word of the Office of the Dead. Dilige Domine conspectu viam meam, direct, Lord, in your sight my way. As you know, all the psalms start with an antiphon. Well, that's the first antiphon of the Office of the Dead, so it's stuck there out of force of habit in our common parlance. I close that parenthesis. But to get back to what I was saying, those weekly long moments with the dead actually didn't do us any harm. Coupled with the fact that on a daily basis, when one went from the cell to the choir, to the church, one was passing our quiet brethren, sleeping sound in the graveyard. Why? Because the monastery was constructed around the brethren who had got there. Therefore, even though there was no name or date on the simple wooden crosses, as forgotten in death as they are in life, nevertheless, each cross corresponded to a cosmic victory. They too had answered that same bell. They too had gone from cell to choir, from choir to cell, and then from choir to the graveyard, where they were waiting the last day. All punctuated by the same merciless bell. Not just every quarter of an hour, but between every quarter of an hour, because there was the avant-garde between each one to warn us should there be a first step to be taken, to leave and to start praying. Well, this was all, therefore, a daily reminder of where we're going. Memento mori. That's an old pre-Christian expression. Remember to die. There would be skulls put here and there. And that actually would be still to this day something that would tend to find sometimes in ancient monastic spirituality. The odd skull looking at you doesn't do any harm. And there might be an inscription on it to the effect that, remember, O man, that what you are now, I once was. What I am now, you will be. In fact, one time when in formation, by then in Italy, it's French community still, the prior took us to places nearby linked with the saint who had used our monastery, St. Catherine of Siena. We visited where she would get a few winks of sleep at night, leaning her head on this kind of stone affair in a niche in the old hospital in the middle of Siena, the old one, and prepare the people dying there to meet their God. But there, as we got in and got out, was a skull, a real one, looking at us with an inscription to that effect. And I was so moved by looking into its silent but very eloquent jaws that I got out any piece of paper I could find. I remember actually a tissue from a coffee we'd taken in the cafe opposite, and I wrote a sonnet to the said skull, thanking him for his message and reminding myself that actually it's a sobering truth. And even if one is young, relatively speaking, it's not that far away. If one looks at the true graph, the true map, eternity is huge. And as some Americans said, one is dead a long time, whereas life is just a punctum, a point in which that long time is decided irreversibly by its end, in concrete, the last breath. Now, with regard therefore to being exposed to this office of the dead, I remember that that psalm used to hit me, that canticle of Hezekiah. It's actually not in the Psalter itself, it's a canticle which comes separately. And it's still in the liturgy actually at Lord's, at least once a month on a Tuesday. And there one sees what happens when a soul thinks it's going to die. Hezekiah really thought he was dying. And what happens when a soul is about to leave this body? I think you know, you would have heard from people, something starts to move pretty quickly. The adrenaline flows, but then something else happens. Apparently, when they're in an accident which is going, it would seem, to be fatal, they see in a few instants their whole life and the state of their soul, and they realize what's happening. This is the crunch, and perhaps it's the first time they've had to face it. There could be actually something supernatural in that, insofar as it's the beginning of the last possible chance. Now, the experts who look into this, such as Maria Simma, who's unfortunately now gone on and left us from this planet because she was very useful to us. She had gifts, but she'd given her life as a victim soul for the souls in purgatory, while she knew things. And she maintained that there was a tiny, tiny moment where perhaps we can't get through to them anymore, but God can, in which they really are confronted. So that should at that point the soul say no, it knows what it's doing. That, by the way, is partly why the Church does allow a priest to anoint just after what would seem to be the stop of a heartbeat, because there's still some kind of warmth and therefore soul around. It's a no man's land that we can't really fathom. We're just doing our best to get our brother, our sister there. But this, of course, is all carefully, clinically brushed under the carpet. Slightly less in Ireland than England, I'd say. And we still are not afraid to confront death openly in Ireland. Children are still taken to an open coffin to kiss Granny goodbye, and that's not a bad thing. In England it's far more clinical. But we need to be aware that actually, as the old medieval chant, which could go back to the bubonic plague, says. We used to sing it sometimes. In media vitae mortuis sumus, in mortis sumus, in the middle of life, in the midst, in the heart of life, we are in death. And that chant, which we used to sing in Lent, at Compline actually, sometimes, it was something that it seemed came from the depth of human misery and crying out from utter powerlessness. Help! It was when, it would seem, the population of Europe was decimated massively by this bubonic plague in 1347, 1348, 49, and it was something which devastated the whole land, right over Europe, and had an effect actually even on culture. Well, this is something which I suppose comes in waves over humanity. Because when we compare that, and the chant that perhaps came from it, with what our parents would have known and faced, the war, and what their parents would have faced before them, the First War, it's not that different. Because when massively, in a short time, friends are going into the beyond, never coming back, it can't but collocate the young in reality. That is actually closer to truth than our superficial, deliberately happy, clappy society, pumped by fast music on the radio, which gives the impression that it's all okay. It's vastly not okay. And it's a good thing that we sometimes calm down, like Hezekiah, and realize we're not here for keeps. And on the graph of eternity, this punctum is very,